Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Meg Delp, the Director of Workplace Mental Health at NAMI, where I lead our Stigma-Free Workplace Initiative, and we are so glad you're here today. I first want to ground us in one important intention before we really dive into this conversation. We are not going to be talking about optimizing yourself, being more productive, fixing anything about who you are. It's more about building that sustainable self-care that fits your actual real life, especially in January when many of us are already pretty tired. If you're joining live, we invite you to listen for just one idea that feels supportive right now and then drop that idea in the comment section. I'm very grateful to be joined by Emma MacDonald from NAMI's HelpLine. Emma, would you please introduce yourself and share what's grounding this conversation for you today?
Sure. Thanks, Meg. And hello, everyone. My name is Emma MacDonald. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm the senior manager of NAMI Helpline Clinical Support. So the Helpline is a nationwide free service that we offer here at NAMI that offers mental health information, resources, and emotional support to people living with a mental health condition, folks supporting a loved one's recovery, or just people experiencing emotional distress and in need of a compassionate listening ear. So this year we've offered support to over 80,000 people reaching out for support via phone, text, or email. So part of my role at the Helpline is actually to support our Helpline staff and interns and volunteer specialists in practicing self-care, which is just such a crucial component of the work that we do as mental health helpers. So I'm really, really glad to be here with y'all today and with you, Meg, to be talking about sustainable self-care. I know that each new year comes with just a ton of pressure, especially when it comes to adopting new health and wellness behaviors at a time when a lot of us already feel so tired, so fatigued from the holiday season and all of our end of year work. So, similar to you, Meg, I guess what's grounding this conversation for me is just the hope that everyone can take away just one tiny idea to help them practice really sustainable self care in the new year.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate how you named the pressure that comes with January, especially, when so many people are fatigued. I mentioned, we're probably all tired. Um, I'm curious from a clinical lens, why do traditional New Year's resolutions so often feel discouraging? They become unsustainable when it comes to mental health.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I want to note first that for some people, New Year's resolutions can be really great. It's a wonderful thing to kind of take stock of what's important to you and set goals that bring motivation and purpose, especially at a time where I feel like a lot of us could really use some motivation and a sense of purpose. But at the same time, New Year's resolutions can definitely be challenging and difficult to follow through with for a couple of different reasons. One of those reasons is that people usually set resolutions that are kind of big, lofty, set in stone goals. Maybe you announce them to your friends and family at a New Year's Eve party, or you write those resolutions in pen on the first page of your new planner for the brand new year. And unlike kind of small goals we might set throughout the year, those New Year's resolutions can come with a real sense of pressure that you have to make these big changes in order to succeed in taking care of yourself or kind of making progress in life. So that's one challenge. Another challenge that comes with New Year's resolutions is that they come with a lot of all or nothing thinking. So let's say that I have set this resolution to wake up, 5 days a week at 5 a.m. and get to the gym every morning. But maybe on the third day, I oversleep, or even worse, I wake up and I just decide it's too cold, I don't want to do it, and I roll back over and I go right back to bed, which I know a lot of folks have experienced. All or nothing thinking makes my brain say, well, you didn't get up this morning, you didn't go to the gym, so you failed. You clearly can't do this at all. It's all or it's nothing. And those are really common thoughts. We all have them, but they can make it really difficult to stay, positive and hopeful and to kind of get back on track and continue doing those things that we know will help us to be well. And then because New Year's resolutions are often those kind of big, lofty, long term goals, they can sometimes ignore really important context about what's going on in our life right now. They can be unrealistic if they don't consider the real capacity, resources, or support that you do or don't have to actually follow through on those resolutions. What I've noticed is that in January, a lot of us feel fatigued from the holiday season, or depending on where you're at in the country, maybe you're really bogged down by the cold weather and the short days, lack of sunlight. And just ignoring those few simple realities can make it really hard to gain traction and get going with those New Year's resolutions. And a lot of people feel like they failed before they've even got started. So that's, of course, really discouraging. And it tends to lead back to more of that all or nothing thinking.
Absolutely. That all or nothing example resonates so much. I know back in the day when I was a therapist, I worked with many clients who really had that all or nothing thinking, that black and white
Mhm.
thinking of I'm either doing this or I'm not.
Right.
Um, and I also hear that kind of self-talk in workplace settings, especially where missing one day for your health or otherwise suddenly becomes I failed my team completely. I let them down. I wasn't there for them. And so it can get us stuck in this thinking pattern of like, well, I can't do anything for myself because then I will have failed at my job.
Mhm.
What you also named so clearly is how resolutions often ignore context. So, capacity, energy, the season that we're in, and the support available to us really matter. If we look at the workplace context, for employees, people are coming back from the holidays depleted. They're trying to meet potentially new goals while still carrying that Q4 exhaustion. We have caregiver stress, financial pressures, and when our capacity is already low, even what feel like reasonable expectations can actually start feeling overwhelming. If we shift to look at managers and HR, we know that for many companies, January brings that renewed performance conversation or new initiatives, that kind of fresh start mentality where we're not really accounting for how our employees are truly feeling in that time. And the NAMI Workplace Mental Health Survey actually found that only 13% of employees will talk to their supervisor about work related mental health challenges. So, we also know many managers don't know how their employees are actually doing. And that's really important to know.
Mhm.
If we look then at the organizational level, many systems within companies assume a clean reset that just doesn't exist. So while work doesn't pause, we know that, we can adjust expectations so people have a little bit of that runway to recover. The mismatch between expectations and capacity is where burnout risk really increases. That, really popular term, we know burnout is real, we know people experience it. Our own poll showed that just over half of employees experienced burnout last year. So it is a real threat to our workforce, to our well being. And so having a gentler ramp up is, it's not about lowering the bar, it's just that alignment with short term expectations with our human reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. And then, bringing that into my own life, I tend to reframe self care as a habit or practice that we can return to or begin, not a task we complete. Um, Again, in that workplace setting, it's kind of asking yourself, what do I need more of at work right now? Could be intentional pauses, social connections, structured goals. What do I need less of? Meetings. I feel like everyone could say meetings. Micromanaging, things like that.
Yeah.
And then finally, what is realistic given my current role, my current workload, and my life outside of work? We know that we can't just shut off our home life and our work life wherever we are. It is all with us all the time. So, can you, Emma, please speak to how self care really does help us regulate our emotions and how we might be able to better notice what we need?
Yeah, absolutely. I like to think of self care as kind of resilience building. Like you said, when we engage in those regular self care practices, that really does help us build up this really strong foundation that weathers against the storm of stress, whether it's that workplace stress, whether it's that home stress. And our bodies often give us cues, right, that our self care practice is out of sync. We can keep an eye out for some of those cues. Really, just signs of emotional dysregulation is a big one. So, things like feeling anxious inexplicably, experiencing brain fog, having trouble focusing, or feeling easily irritated and overwhelmed. These experiences are really our body's way of telling us that we need something different. that whether that be more rest, more challenge or variety, more connection, or even more fresh air and sunshine. And when our nervous system is deeply affected by dysregulated emotions, we can even practice self care by doing some grounding and relaxation activities to remind our nervous systems that we're safe, we're okay, we're taken care of. So, for example, in dialectical behavior therapy or DBT, we use the acronym TIP, TIPP, to remember distress tolerance skills that help us regulate our emotions in a pinch by just quickly changing our body chemistry. So TIP stands for temperature, intense exercise, paced breathing, and progressive muscle relaxation. So for temperature, that could be taking a quick cool shower. It could be splashing your face with cold water, or taking an ice cube from the freezer and putting that on your wrists or the back of your neck, really quickly changing that body temperature to help your body kind of change its chemistry and kind of regulate on a dime. And then intense exercise is just what it sounds like. Take a quick run around your house or around the block. Do some jump squats if you can. Something that really gets your heart rate up and going. Again, tips that body chemistry and helps you regulate, helps remind your body that you're safe. Paced breathing is an exercise where you really intentionally breathe in and breathe out. You can breathe in. I appreciate that you did that along with me there, Meg.
Great reminder.
Yeah. When you breathe in with paced breathing, you might choose to breathe in for 2 to 5 seconds. And when you breathe out or exhale, you might do that for about 4 to 7 seconds. Really, the only requirement is that you breathe out longer than you breathe in. And that helps your body to, again, tip that body chemistry and regulate. And then last part of that is progressive muscle relaxation. So that's an exercise where you progressively kind of tense your muscle groups in your body and then release them, kind of noticing the sense of relaxation that comes from that release. So usually you'll start with kind of the tip top of your head, your face muscles, your forehead. You'll tighten those up and then release and then notice how that feels and then kind of do that exercise throughout your whole body down to your tippy toes. And that one can even be abbreviated so that you can kind of use it anywhere, anytime. Maybe you can only really clench your fists and your arms, but you're in public. And so it's a good, easy exercise to do without anyone noticing and to kind of tip that chemistry. So tip skills are just, one example of really effective and easy to remember grounding skills you can use in a moment of overwhelm. But there are so many different things like that might help you when you notice you're feeling emotionally dysregulated and that you're kind of just out of sync. So that might be pulling up a guided meditation on YouTube. One of my favorite activities, as silly as it sounds, is just to sing a song out loud. Our nervous systems know that if we're stopping to sing, we're probably not being chased by a bear. We're not in danger, right? And so it's a really good indication to our nervous systems that we're safe, we're okay, and it helps get oxygen to your brain, which is always good. So just remembering that our bodies will give us cues when we're out of sync, and we can listen to our bodies and engage in some quick practices to help us stay regulated when we need it.
I love the tip skills. I use those all the time myself. I talked with a lot of clients about them. I know when I'm about to do a presentation, whether in person or virtual, I often will do the paired muscle relaxation with paced breathing. It is so, so, so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, highly recommend giving that one a shot. And when we bring that idea about emotion regulation into the workplace, we also want to notice that it's often not just the individual's responsibility when we think about the workplace. If we look at a family, we know that for that family to function well, they need to know how to self-regulate while also showing up for one another.
Mm-hmm.
And while an organization is not like a family, it also needs to function well together. And so the employees need to understand their own capacity, their own goals, how to regulate their emotions. But the organization also needs to have those policies, the practices in order to support that true employee well-being. So again, if we kind of break that down, employees, this might look like taking a real lunch break. I just had lunch before this. I did live to make sure I was like really in it. It could also look like asking for priorities from your manager to really understand what it is that you're supposed to be focusing on. Or if we bring that into our body, noticing when your body needs a pause instead of pushing through. we look at the manager level, could mean normalizing those needs and then practicing those needs. So, also taking that lunch break, encouraging your employees to take lunch breaks, saying things like, if you need to step away, that's okay. I just stepped away for 15 minutes before this meeting. Really modeling regulated behavior. Organizational level, regulation shows up in how the work is actually designed. So, our meetings often stacked back to back, our response times or project timelines really unrealistic. Are people penalized for healthy boundary setting? Burnout research shows that preventing and healing burnout is not just an individual responsibility, it's actually the organization responsibility. By ensuring employees are really supported in how they manage their energy, building meaningful connections, feeling they're treated fairly at work, things that often don't actually cost the company anything, but are very, very impactful for the individual employees. And so, yeah, self care practices are just far more sustainable when the workplace promotes employee well being. In my own work, I know I've learned that sustainability also means adjusting my self care practices as my role and responsibilities change. This was especially true last year when I had my daughter. My capacity was very different for a few months. Um, and also, when I got my first direct report, that increased leadership responsibility was really meaningful to me and definitely very impactful to how I was working. Emma, you have navigated this both as a clinician and a leader supporting others. I'm curious what that has looked like for you.
Yeah, well, kind of like you noted earlier, Meg, uh, the self care really is kind of that ongoing practice. And as someone who really loves to check things off a list, it has been really hard not to treat self care just like one more item on my to do list. But again, it really is those regular practices that we engage in to sustain our well being. That's physically, emotionally, socially, spiritually, and reminding myself of that has been really, really important over time, and as my roles and as my responsibilities have changed. I really like to think of self-care as like adding to my wall of resilience. So like each self-care practice adds a brick to that wall, and it's not gonna just break down or fall apart just because I wasn't able to practice self-care the same way that I usually do, or how I would hope. So some things that I've kind of picked up along the way when it comes to adjusting my self care practice and being realistic about it, what it is going to look like, is noticing if I feel a sense of dread about the self care actions that I've planned to do, or maybe a really strong sense of guilt about not doing some self care practice that I had planned to. Those are good signs that I just might not be choosing self care practices that are sustainable or even helpful to me right now. So I'll share just a quick example. Since my daily work has, long focused on directly supporting other people as a social worker, my self-care often looked like really internal kind of things, or personally focused kinds of things. So whether that was taking a run after work, or just having some kind of unrestricted fun time for myself after work, watching TV, reading a good book, those kinds of things. That used to be really, really important for my self care practice. But my kind of work setup has changed a lot over time. I spend a lot of time in front of a computer now, and I don't do as much, one-on-one direct supporting people as I used to. And so a couple weeks back, I was thinking that a better way to spend my me time might be to volunteer with an organization in my community that does some really great work, and also just kind of forge connection with my community a little bit. And I went ahead and signed up. And then when I got the notification, the sign up confirmation, I noticed that I felt really excited about it. And so that excitement, rather than kind of dread or just like, it's one more thing I'm checking off, or that sense of guilt that came up sometimes, I felt like that was a really good cue that I was choosing something that's sustainable and actually contributing to my well being as my life stands right now.
I love that example. It shows that, as our workspace changes, like yours did, or, as our social interaction changes, as our energy shifts, our self-care will have to change to match that. And that is okay, that is expected, rather than, thinking, oh, I have to change the self-care practice that I have long enjoyed. That means I'm failing.
Right.
No, it means I'm adjusting. um, and stigma-free workplace, we're bringing it to the workplace again. For employees, a key signal is whether that self-care feels like you can actually engage in it in a way that is healthy, and in a way that is sustainable. Does it, like you mentioned, Emma, does it bring relief or does it bring guilt?
Mm.
If we're feeling that guilt, it might mean that the practice just doesn't fit your current workload or your schedule. Sometimes guilt can also show up when we feel like we should be doing something, but we're not. And sometimes that is based on other people's expectations. So, definitely important to notice that. When we look at leaders, it's really about recognizing emotional labor for their teams as well as their own. So, if your employees are in helping roles, if they are people managers themselves, if they have caregiving responsibilities outside the workplace, all of these things draw from the same energy reserve. So, understanding the full person, not just their work self, is very important for thinking about their capacity, their energy, their own workload. And so, yeah, just really getting to know your employees is very important. For organizations, it's really about reinforcing that sustainability is not just encouraging more self care activities, it's looking at the foundation of the person's day. So, workloads, expectations, resources that allow people to access well being practices without penalty. And so this is where we want to be very, very clear. Self care cannot compensate for chronic overload, for unclear expectations, unsupported roles. We need to make sure that our employees are truly supported to take care of themselves. We cannot just take care of ourselves and then dive back into a workspace that is not supporting that and expect to stay healthy. This looks like ensuring psychological safety so people are able to speak up and ask for the things that they need without fear of negative consequences. Um, when we have that psychological safety, employees can actually take action, use their voice, or anonymous survey options if that is the preference, to ask for what they need so that employers can act on that and provide resources, provide supports that employees are actually going to use. It could also look like offering mental health days without requiring justification or a doctor's note, training managers to recognize burnout, distress, offering flexibility that's applied consistently, not selectively. And I've mentioned this a few times, those clear expectations about workload and priorities are very, very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
We also know NAMI's poll found that 9 in 10 employees found that or said that mental health care benefits are important to a positive workplace culture. So, making sure that not just how we interact one on one, but the support structures around the employee, the resources that we offer, are offering that mental health support. So, it's very clear that number 9 and 10, it shows that people really do want access to mental health care,
Yeah.
to be able to see a therapist, see a psychiatrist, join a support group, whatever it is that they feel they need for their mental health, they are going to get the support for that. So back to you, Emma. You've talked about how support has to be relevant to communities, settings people work in. Can you kind of dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I really love what you brought up, Meg, about kind of the different hats people wear and how they bring that into the workplace role that they're in, being a caregiver, for example. I think it's so critical for companies to really recognize that not all settings, cultures, and communities think about wellness in the same way. So, the things that you need to do to support your employees' wellness should take into consideration the values and practices that are important, relevant, and realistic, even in that community, that setting, that workplace. For example, I live in Metro Detroit. There's lots of manufacturing and production jobs around here. I have several family members that work in production, do factory work and overtime. We know it's a pretty consistent expectation, and sometimes that's not avoidable. It's part of the role. But what leaders in those companies can do is that they can communicate those overtime expectations in advance so that people have the opportunity to really plan meaningful activities and things and time with family and whatever it is that they want to spend their time off on, and to make sure that people still are getting enough time off where they can rest and recover and be able to come back and do good work. So making sure that those things are being provided within the context that makes sense in those work roles. There's also lots of diverse cultures and communities in my area. So another way that companies could realistically support sustainable well-being is to offer time off or honor time off without penalty for religious holidays that people need to take, especially since we know that such a crucial part of self-care for so many people is to connect with their religious community, to connect with their culture, connect with their family. So that's another thing people can do, or leaders in companies and agencies can do to support their employees. Another thing I invite folks to consider is whether you have a group of people at your workplace who would really appreciate kind of a company party, mingling, dancing, kickbacks, or whether you have a group of people who would really, really just value the afternoon off and make those choices, offer those kind of perks accordingly based on what makes sense for the folks that actually work for you and the community that the workplace is in. Or another example, even, is maybe you have a company with a lot of young professionals who are really looking to advance their careers and really contribute to the company in new and meaningful ways. So supporting wellness in that workplace might look like having a kind of built-in structure of mentorship, or regularly having opportunities for growth or a clear path for advancement, making sure that people feel valued and challenged within the workplace. So just generally, it's so important, I think, for companies to take into consideration the type of things that are actually meaningful, necessary, and realistic within that sector of work and the community of folks who work there.
I love all your examples. Um, Mentorship has especially been important for me. I have really, really appreciated all my supervisors in my life. My NAMI supervisor, Barb Solish, shout out to you. You
Shout
have
out,
been
Barb.
wonderful. Yeah, just the best. And then going back a little bit to kind of thinking about diverse cultures, one thing that one of my colleagues recommended early on when I tried to schedule a meeting, and she was like, "Hey, I'm off that day for a religious observance." She sent me a link that actually lists out all the different religious holidays throughout the year for all the different religions, different spiritualities. And so now when I go to schedule a meeting that has many different people in attendance, or even just someone who has shared with me what their religion is, I check that calendar first to make sure that it is a day that actually will work for them. So it's, yeah, just simple things like that can be really, really impactful so that people feel like they are seen, and can really engage in that self
Oops.
care.
I love that.
Yeah, it's easy stuff. I also hear in your examples that intentionality. So being really sustainable about our well-being, it can look very different depending on the workforce, but it often starts with just listening to your employees, designing those supports that represent their actual lives. There's often not a one size fits all for all organizations in all different industries. And it's very important to make sure that we are engaging in that understanding very explicitly. So if self care feels out of reach for you right now, it's not a personal failure. It might be a signal that something in your environment needs attention or adjusting so that you can create that space, find that energy to do some self care. I also want to say self care does not necessarily look like bubble baths and getting your nails done. It can be, like you mentioned, Emma, finding that social outlet with volunteering. It can be investing time in looking at your finances, even. Like there are so many different facets of our life where self care looks very different than what we often see on social media, or, yeah, just it can look very different. And we want to make sure that we are really engaging in this spaces in our life that are going to make us feel the most grounded, the most safe. So, kind of looking at workers or employees who are juggling multiple roles. Emma, what would you want people to hear? People who are really kind of juggling multiple roles in their lives.
Yeah. I think I just want to validate that, right now we have a lot coming at us and it doesn't really seem to be slowing down. Dr. Kristen Neff talks about self compassion, and kind of a core part of self compassion that she notes is that recognizing when a struggle, a challenge, a mistake, a hardship is really rooted in humanity. You're certainly not the only one going through that. It's a really human thing. And if you're having trouble with self care practice, you're having a hard time regularly engaging in activities that, promote your own wellness, I invite you to just consider that that's such a human thing right now. You're in good company, right? And like you said, Meg, that is not a sign of failure. It's really just another step on the path of learning about ourselves, what we need and what we do or don't have capacity for at any given moment. Another thing I want to note is that even though, self is included in self care, I don't actually think it's super helpful to be obsessing over ourselves and all the things that we're doing to be the most perfect, most well versions of ourselves all the time. Like you said, self care can look like so many different things. It really should be strengthening your foundation, whatever that looks like for you, with simple everyday activities, some of which are way too small to ever even make it on your to do list. Again, like singing with your best friend in the car or something. So I'll also note that there's help available. If you have trouble with self-care practice, don't hesitate to reach out to the NAMI helpline. Trained volunteer specialists have lived experience either as individuals living with a mental health condition or folks who have supported a loved one with a mental health condition. So they really get it. And they can provide a warm, compassionate, listening ear, talk with you through what realistic self-care might look like, and give you the encouragement that you need to keep at it. And then I'll also plug a few resources that we have publicly available on our Knowledge and Resource Center at helplinefaqs.nami.org. So we have a couple self-care related knowledge articles. One is, what is self-care? How can practicing self-care help with my mental health? And then another one is, what can I do to take care of myself as a caregiver of a loved one living with mental illness? Because we know that self-care can be especially tough for folks in caregiving roles.
Amazing. And those links to those knowledge articles are going to be dropped in the chat. I know we're just at about time. If you can hang out with us for just a few minutes more, amazing. If not, this is going to be recorded and on the NAMI LinkedIn Live page. So as we wrap up, there are 3 reflection prompts for you, our audience, to consider for your own work self-care. And you're choosing just one because we're not overloading, we're not overwhelming, we're choosing just one thing to really start looking at. So one work boundary that you might adjust, that can look like taking more breaks. It can look like setting meeting times a little bit shorter. So that meeting that was going to be an hour, maybe you make it 45 minutes. If it was going to be 45 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, so on and so forth. One existing supportive habit that you could recommit to. So that could be taking a walk every, mid-morning between meetings, or when you're feeling that kind of mid-afternoon slump, giving yourself a little bit of time to decompress so you can jump back in. And then finally, just one expectation from yourself or others that you might want to release that's just not serving you, it's not realistic, and you can let it go. You can share it in the chat if you'd like to. We'd love to hear. But yeah, just what do you want your self care to feel like at work this year? All right, Emma, thank you so much for grounding this conversation in compassion, clinical insight, real world context, and thank you to everyone who joined us. If you're an employee, a people manager, an HR professional looking to build healthier workplaces, NAMI's stigma-free workplace resources are designed to support that work. We have so many. That link will also be in the chat. And if you need personal support, as Emma mentioned, the NAMI helpline is always a great place to start. And we will leave you with this reminder: sustainable self-care is not about doing more, it's about aligning work and life with what you actually need. Again, thank you so much, Emma.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.